Good afternoon. Okay, so I've had some time to be here with some of you all since yesterday. What I can say is this room is full of women empowering each other, lifting each other up, and that is exactly what I believe Juan is here for. So I'm going to take you back. It's Christmas Eve. I'm sitting between my children making them sleep. The house is full and everything feels just right. Until an email comes in. One line, one attachment. And within a second, I forward the email. Sometimes the hardest decisions, the most problematic decisions, happen in an instant. In fast, defensible moments. Fast forward, I'm standing in a place that I've spent my entire life in. Sometimes life just takes your breath away. I've spent my entire career in rooms like this. I'm an attorney. I understand risk, I understand compliance, and I understand documentation, and I understand consequences. But in this moment right now, I have no control. I stand and I wait. I wait for a single phrase that will arguably change the rest of my life. And when it comes, it doesn't echo, it lands. Rashmi Aaron, you are hereby sentenced to 1 year and 1 day in federal prison. I did not wake up one day and just decide to compromise my integrity. I'm an Ivy League attorney, a Wall Street investment banker, a high achiever, a mother of 2 incredible children, and the daughter of immigrants. But I made quick decisions that seemed defensible, under pressure and speed, like many of you. And oftentimes, it's in these moments that we don't realize what we're doing. And this is what ethical drift looks like when you're inside it. It doesn't happen to bad people. It's good people making decisions under stress, under pressure, in the noise and uncertainty of life. And these decisions are affecting your clients, your families that you're here to serve, your communities. And every single decision we make matters. Because this is not what happened to me. It's not about that. This is about what happens to all of us when pressure, speed, and responsibility collide, and we're not equipped to handle it. Now, none of you are going to prison, but every single one of you have experienced the drift. And by the end of our time together, you will have a process, a mental process, guardrails for your thoughts. So when those high-stakes moments come and you're in it, you will know exactly how to make the right decisions, the best decisions, even when all of those pressures and the speed of life is colliding. So I built guardrails, but it didn't start because I just decided to create guardrails around my thoughts. It all starts and dates back to my grandfather. His name was Banarsi Das Sadaf. He was a freedom fighter against the British during the revolution in India. And as it turns out, on the day that my dad was born in 1946, my Dadaji, my grandfather, was sitting in jail with Gandhi. Yeah, so I grew up with stories about my grandfather, right? He was a survivor, he was tenacious, he was a fighter, and he never gave up. India, of course, gained its independence, but the country's in chaos, the economy's in turmoil, and our family, we were jewelers, were struggling. They didn't know from one day to the next if they were going to be able to feed their 12 children. Right? So one day my dad gets this idea, he's going to come to America to achieve the dream. He marries my mom, he comes with $8 in his pocket, and they believe, this simple belief, that with hard work and education, they can make it. Eventually, when I'm born, Rashmi, I'm born into this legacy of courage, of justice, and never giving up. When I was little, I used to argue with my dad about everything. So one day when I was 10, my dad looks over at me and he goes, Rashmi, you should be an attorney one day. Because you're strong, you're confident, and then you can argue with whoever you want. And I looked back to him and I was like, okay, I am going to be the best attorney I can be. And from that day forward, success meant I've got to do it faster. I've got to win all the awards. I made a plan, all right? Some of you guys probably can relate to this. I was like, if I go to the best schools, get the best grades, get the best education, I'll get the jobs, and I'll make a lot of money. And I make an entire decision of what my life is going to look like. I have a path. And that path included the faster I did things, the more I got rewarded. And life and school kept giving me these things. I tell my kids, I used to come home on Fridays, because I was a total nerd. I'd come home on Fridays and do all my homework for the following week, and then ask for more. Right? So I started getting noticed by the teachers, and that felt like it was getting rewarded. So that speed started to equal reward, and reward became my worth. And all of my self-worth, my self-love, my self-esteem became rooted in achievement. My dad was proud of me. My community was proud of me, and I certainly started to get into the best schools. So I go to UNC Chapel Hill. Any Tar Heels? Okay, go Heels. As you can see, Carolina blue is one of my brand colors. It happens to be one of your colors, which is pretty awesome. So I go to Carolina, and as Mark will attest, I did all of the things at Carolina. I won the awards. I ran for student body president against Mark, and it was inducted. He will tell you I came in ahead of him. I was inducted into all the top honorary societies, right? And so I was doing the things. I was following the plan. From there, I went to Wall Street, and I worked at Morgan Stanley in investment banking. And from there, I went to Columbia Law School. So by all accounts, I'm following this awesome plan that I've created for my life. And I am achieving success. And it feels great. Eventually, by way of California, I end up back in Miami, and I marry a firefighter. And we have these two little kids. Aren't they yummy? Yeah. Can I tell you, I don't remember taking this picture? Why? Yeah. Mom brain, somebody said. You know, at this point, my kids were 2 and 3, but I was a solo entrepreneur. And all I could think about was, I've got to get the next client. I've got to be able to make payroll. And so I was hustling. And I was going to every possible networking event, every dinner, I was selling my services at the gym, okay? And I was a real estate attorney. So I was trying to get clients, right? It's 2007. Who remembers what's happening in 2007? Oh, all of you. Yeah, you're all in the real estate market. Yeah, so my kids started asking me, Mommy, are you coming home for dinner? And I started having marital problems. Right? And it's in this context that I get the chance to meet a real estate developer. And because you all recognize what was happening, the South Florida market was booming. And I was a solo practitioner. I had been hustling for clients, any closing I could possibly get my hands on for title fees. I had lack of stability. So when I get the chance to meet a real estate developer, what's going on in my head is, if I can get this one big client, that's the answer. So I jumped at this opportunity. I remember his office was in Miami Beach, and I live in South Miami, Pinecrest. I remember I drove to his office, and the developer himself sat in the side office, right? But his 2 operations guys sat in the conference room across from me, and they began to describe what they were doing. And so since this is a real estate audience, I'm going to give you a little bit more detail. What they were doing was they were giving buyers incentives to buy their condo units through a rental guarantee disclosed on the settlement statement, because the money was going through a management company. So in my head, I was like, hey, that's creative. But I've spent a couple of years now closing creative transactions. I know all these other really big developers who are represented by very big law firms are doing something similar. And man, I wanted this client. I thought this client was the answer to my financial struggles, to the instability, and I thought I could get home to my kids for dinner now, finally. So I jumped. And I know I should know better, but I didn't ask the questions. I didn't ask for a second opinion. I didn't ask for help. I really wanted this client. Within 2 weeks, I had my first closing request. And it was like a steamroll came in, and I never took the time to figure out, who is this guy I'm about to lay in bed with? And guys, I am surrounded by attorneys. My parents are attorneys, my friends are attorneys, my mentors are attorneys. I could have gone to any number of people to ask for help or a second opinion. And I realize now I didn't, and I silenced my inner voice because I didn't want to lose a client. I don't want to lose that stability I had. So a couple months later, it was Christmas Eve, and the entire house is full of family. My aunties, my uncles, my cousins, my sister, my nieces, my nephews. You get it. I come from a really big Indian family. And they all descended to Miami for like a family reunion that year. You can smell the pine tree. The Christmas music is playing. We've drank eggnog. The kids have baked Christmas cookies for Santa, and we left them out. And I go into my kids' bedroom to make them sleep. Back to the email. And as I'm making my children sleep, so Maya was in her crib, and Kyler was in his toddler bed, and I'm sitting in the middle on a glider. You guys know those. And as I'm singing to my children to sleep, an email comes in. But I'm singing. It's nostalgic. My parents used to sing me the same lullaby. But as I'm singing, I'm picking up my BlackBerry, because this is how old it was, and I look down at my email. Question, do you think I should open this email on Christmas Eve at 8 o'clock? Does anybody think I should open this email? No, because you guys are reasonable. But I'm a solopreneur. I'm a young attorney. I have a small little practice. And I am trying to distinguish myself and separate myself from every other attorney that is my competitor and keep this client who's giving me financial stability. So I open the email. And in the email is one line and one attachment. And the email read, buyer to receive $70,000 from rental guarantee. Now I knew the rental guarantee was the buyer incentive, and there were documents that were attached justifying the rental guarantee. But immediately my gut was like a sucker punch. I was like, ugh, that doesn't feel right. But I forward the email, and I don't open the attachment. So why do I forward the email even though clearly I don't feel like it's right? Something doesn't feel right. Well, I have a house full of relatives. It's almost Christmas morning. My kids are not yet sleeping, and none of my presents are wrapped. Have you ever forwarded an email without opening the attachment? Without maybe giving it the time it actually deserves? We've all done it. Fast forward, you'll see what happens to that email. So 15 months go by. I spend that 15 months doing about 200 closings for this client in Tampa and Palm Beach. And then I don't even work in transactions anymore. I stop working for the developer because all those units have closed, and I merged my practice with my father's. And now we're litigating. The foreclosure market is booming. My dad has been doing foreclosures for like decades. And I start growing our practice. So I grow our practice by 1,200%, and things were great. Until 4 years later, 2 FBI agents show up. Anybody here deal with the FBI ever? No, thank God, because it's very scary. So these two agents showed up, they showed their badges, and my receptionist came in, and like immediately I was full of fear, but I also thought, it's the FBI, man, I have to talk to them, because if I don't talk to them, they'll definitely think I did something wrong. Right? And human nature kicks in, and they absolutely operate off intimidation. So I let these two agents into my office, and I used to have this circular table in front of my desk, right? So we sat at this table for 4 hours as they grilled me. And no, I did not have an attorney. They showed me pictures and documents and emails and attachments, and I'm answering these questions. Yes, no. As if I can remember what happened 4 years ago. Who has that kind of memory? And then they leave. 2 more years go by, and I now get a grand jury subpoena for documents. So I'm operating with this perception, right? I am the real estate attorney. I'm the records custodian. They just want my files. So I submit all my files with this developer. There were about 200. And within 3 months, my attorney calls me into his office and he says, "Rush me, you're a target." I didn't even know what that meant. I'm not a criminal lawyer, I'm a dirt lawyer. I'm a real estate lawyer. Like, I took 1 criminal law class in law school. And when he explained it, I literally collapsed and I was shaking hysterically. Because this was my whole life. This was everything I had worked so hard for, and all I could think about is, I'm disgracing my parents and my kids and my community. I sit on a lot of boards in Miami. And what's going to happen to them? And what's going to happen to me? And I tried very hard to avoid indictment. But in April of 2014, I was indicted for 1 count of conspiracy to commit bank fraud and 24 counts of bank fraud. They took 24 of those transactions, they attached it to the complaint, and they indicted me. So a couple weeks later, so my parents are leaders in the Miami community, especially in the Indian part of the community. And it was very important that we invited and we told our Indian community. So my aunties and uncles all came over, and we fed them samosas, of course. And they came over, and before they came, I was absolutely convinced that every single one of them would walk out when we told them. Because I'm like their pride and joy. I'm one of the eldest in my generation in the community of Miami. And I absolutely believe that they love me because I'm a superstar. Because I've gone to the best schools and done all the right things. So why would they support me now? So Dad was standing in the corner, and I was sitting on the couch. Everyone was around. My mom was here, and one of my uncles was sitting here, and Dad told them that I had been indicted. And Dad's crying, and I'm crying. My mom is here, hard as nails. She doesn't cry. And this uncle here says to me, "Beti, one day you'll realize," Beti in Hindi means daughter, "that this is not happening to you, it's happening for you." And man, I didn't get it then. I was like, how could this be happening for me? But it became a seed that got planted in the back of my head. I don't know why this is happening, God, but I'm going to trust. A couple months later, now I had spent about 4 months going through discovery. So I printed out 200,000 pages of documents and 15,000 emails, and I was like, I'm going to prove my innocence. I'm going to find that smoking gun. So every few weeks I would meet with my attorney, and we would separate out the good pieces of evidence and the bad pieces of evidence. 4 months later, he said, "Can you and your parents come in for a meeting?" So Mom, Dad, and I walk in expecting to talk about trial prep. Right? We're going to talk about exhibits, strategy, expert witnesses, my testimony. And instead, David was my attorney, very good friend of mine. Like, we lived down the street from each other. His wife went to Carolina with me. Our kids are friends. his partner Margot stood up and started giving us a presentation. And she said, Rashmi, if you go to trial, the government's going to stand up and give their case. And they're going to give some evidence. And then we're going to stand up and give our case, our defense, and our evidence. And then the government's going to stand up and give their rebuttal. Any guess on the evidence? The email. How could I have known 7 years earlier that an email that I forwarded could be the nail in the coffin in something like this? And David looked at me and he goes, Rashmi, if you go to trial, which we'll do because you're our client, like if you want to go to trial, we will go and we'll try our best, but I'm telling you right now, you're going to lose. And you're looking at 20 years in federal prison. So if you go to trial, the jury's going to get a whole host of jury instructions, but let's talk about 2 of them that you probably are not thinking about. So the first jury instruction he talked about was conspiracy. So the conspiracy jury instruction says, in my words, if the defendant knew even one detail out of 500 million, you, the jury, have to convict her. And he looks at me and he goes, Rashmi, your name is on every settlement statement, every document, every email, every check. Do you actually think a jury is going to think you didn't know even one detail? Because this is what happened. When I went through discovery, I learned that this developer was doing all sorts of things outside of my closing file that I did not know. That gave rise to the conspiracy. But see, none of that mattered because I knew there was a rental guarantee and I should have asked more questions. And then we talked about the second jury instruction. The second jury instruction he talked about was willful blindness. Again, in my words, not lawyer, not legal, you lawyers out here. The willful blindness jury instruction says, you can't put your head in the sand. You can't pretend not to know what's happening. And as an attorney, you have a fiduciary duty to do more, he said. Because he said not doing something is still doing something wrong. So I did the hardest thing I've ever had to do, which is I took off my fighting hat and I put on ownership. In that meeting, my dad walked out like 6 times to go to the bathroom, and he came back with his eyes just a little redder. My mom is still hard as nails. And from that moment on, I made a decision that I'm going to be a convicted felon for the rest of my life. A few months later, I actually pled in front of a judge. And then I made a decision. I did not know if the U.S. Attorney's Office would release a press release. I did not want people to gossip about it. So I began to make a spreadsheet, because I'm a nerd. I made a spreadsheet of like all the people in my life that I thought knew my history and my character. So friends from elementary school, college, law school, Morgan Stanley, my kids' friends' parents, my kids' teachers, my nonprofit executive directors, politicians in Miami, essentially people that had known me through the course of my life that could speak to my history and my character. And one by one, I picked up the phone and I called them. And I told them the truth. And I will tell you that before I picked up the phone, for every single person, I was absolutely convinced that they would hang up on me one by one. Because why would they want to be my friend anymore? Don't they love me because I'm this superstar achiever? Because all of my value is rooted in that. And something incredible happened, which is that 182 people wrote letters to the judge for me. So these are 4. And people shared stories of how I affected them and influenced them and touched them from like when I was 12 in ways that I didn't even remember. We impact people every single day without actually knowing sometimes. And I learned that people are very forgiving of our humanity when we give them the chance. I had spent my whole life believing that I have to be perfect to be loved, that I have to achieve to have any value and worth in life. And I went through this experience and I realized, oh my God, people love me for me. One of my friends said, Rashmi, you stood naked and exposed for all of us to judge you, and we did. And we still love you. And we got to teach our kids about you. How powerful is that? How many of you have been in a federal courtroom? Some of you, probably lawyers in here. So, federal courtrooms are, let's just say they're like this long. No chandeliers like this. Very intimidating. And on the day of my sentencing, those 182 people showed up for me. They drove down from Charlotte and surprised me and flew down from New York, and all of my family came in, and they showed up on a hot Tuesday, June morning, just to show the judge that they supported me and loved me. So I walked up to that podium in the middle, and the judge sat on that stand. And I apologized to the judge, and then I turned around and I apologized to my family and my community, and I promised to do better. This is 10 years later, I'm standing in front of you. I had no idea that this is what the for me would be like, but I promised to do better when this happened. And then the judge sentenced me to 1 year and a day in prison. And I can tell you in that moment, I collapsed and I was crying hysterically. And it's not that I was scared for me, right? I'm my grandfather's granddaughter. I'm a survivor. I'm a fighter. I can get through anything. Who was I scared for? What's going to happen to my kids? Who's going to love on them? Because aren't we the apple of their eye? Right, we're the heroes. Who's going to love on them? Who's going to take care of them? And though most people could potentially say, what a day of failure, I have chosen to treat that day differently. I have redefined what success means to me, which is, can I touch and inspire one person by sharing the story? Because 182 people showed up for me that day. So before I go on, I do have a quick challenge. I would like to know who can guess who this is. This is someone who talks about failure. And I'm going to walk out. Whoever guesses is going to get some chocolate truffles. I was going to bring homemade chocolate truffles. Sorry, I forgot. So I bought some in San Diego. So who can guess who this is? Ready? He was in foster care in Georgia. He was kicked out of his home at 16 for selling drugs. At the age of 3, he could recite all of Jose Marti's poems by heart. In 2024, he bought naming rights to a college football stadium. And when Hurricane Maria hit, he quietly sent his own jet to ferry Puerto Rican cancer patients, and he started a tuition-free school slam. Who knows who this is? Who said it?
Is it Bad Bunny?
No, it's not Bad Bunny. Close. Yes. Not Mark Cuban?
Pitbull.
Pitbull! Yes! You guys can dance with me if you want. All right. Good job. So, Mr. 305, Mr. Worldwide, you know that Pitbull believes that he has told me this because, yes, I have been the commencement speaker at his school. He's a good friend of mine. But Pitbull says all the time that failure is just an opportunity to try again. And without failure, none of us are actually going to grow and get anywhere. And we have to risk it. Now, I'm not saying risk what I did, right? But failure, we are not defined by our failures. And it wasn't until I went through this really hard experience that I began to understand that it is in my imperfections that I have grown and I have evolved, right? And become stronger. So on the day of my surrender, it was August 15, 2015, I had to surrender. And that morning, I had a few goals. I wanted to run. I used to be an avid runner. I wanted to run at sunrise and pray with my family. So my happy place in Miami is Madison Hammock Park. So I went there. As you can see, my son didn't even come because he was so upset. You can see my dad's been crying and my mom has not. It is absolutely a theme. It's a theme. And in this moment, I was so full of uncertainty because I had no idea what to expect. Right? The kids were asking me, Mommy, will you be safe? Mommy, what will you eat? Mommy, what will you wear? I had no idea. And if you ask my husband, he will tell you, ex-husband now, I'm a control freak. And now I was about to enter this time of my life where I had no control over anything. Who will I meet? Where will I sleep? What will I eat? No control. But I had no other choice but to surrender. And when I did, I became 05121-104. And I was handcuffed and shackled with a waist chain. And I know I don't fit the mold. The kids would come visit me every couple weeks. You may notice that orange is one of my brand colors, right? I always have orange on. It is not because of Orange Is the New Black. My brand color, my prison color was actually safari green, army green. So those of you out here wearing army green, yeah, you'll never catch me in army green again. I'm like very traumatized. But the kids would come and they just wanted to hug on me and love me, right? I learned to be present with them. The first time they came, there was a side room where there were board games. So the first time they ever came, they picked out Apples to Apples. Has anybody ever played this game? Oh my God, a lot of shaking heads. I had never played this. So that became our game every time they came to visit. And as we would play games, they would just tell me about their day and tell me about who was bullying them and tell me about what grades they got and tell me about soccer and football, all the things that kids want to talk about with their mom. Now, I did call them every night and I would video chat with them every weekend, and I wrote to them and I emailed them every day before they went to school. But hugging them is different, right? And then, so those of you that have seen Orange Is the New Black, my cube was pretty similar, except we had bunk beds. I used to sleep on this top bunk. And I had a lot of time to ponder and think and reflect and deconstruct what went wrong. And weirdly, I had to lose my freedom to gain freedom. To gain the clarity and understanding that I was living in this world that I had trapped myself in. Because what I thought was freedom was not. I was imprisoned by my thoughts, by what I thought society demanded, by what I thought my culture demanded. I was a prisoner to all of that pressure and then the speed at which I thought I had to accomplish things to keep going. And Miami is terrible for this, right? I don't know which other cities you all are from, but Miami is so stuck in what it looks like, what car you're driving, what house you live in, all of those superficial things. That is easy to get caught up in, especially in the days and age that we're in of social media. What I gathered after I came home, and I did basically a decade now of research, I had to understand what went wrong. I needed to understand for myself, how did the perfect little Indian girl go so off path? Because I used to define myself by all of those accolades and perfection. Maybe you can relate. And yet, I drifted. So as I began to understand how we drift, it doesn't happen in bad people. It happens in good people operating under pressure and speed and the noise. So I began to think about, what if I created something? I need to understand first what went wrong. And I recognize that there are actually 4 walls that we find ourselves in. So the first is uncertainty. In 2007, when I was going through this, I had total uncertainty, right? I was hustling, trying to grow my business. I was having marital problems. The kids were at home asking me to come home. And so the uncertainty of will I be able to survive? Can I make payroll? Can I pay for my kids' school? All of that uncertainty was looming with pressure on me. And that pressure became a wall. It became a context under which I was operating. On top of that, in 2007, you started having hints of the market about to collapse. Interest rates were having issues. Now fast forward to today, 2026. Are we in uncertainty right now? I actually believe that we are always in uncertainty. It is like kind of the universal truth, and we need to thrive and learn how to grow and live within uncertainty and evolve in it. There's a study that came out at the end of 2025. It's called the World Uncertainty Index. Some of you are nodding your heads. You've seen this. Do you know that the world believes that we are more unstable and more uncertain than ever before in the history of the world? More than the pandemic, more than the Spanish flu, more than any war. Isn't that crazy? We are living in total uncertainty right now. Government uncertainty, market uncertainty, climate uncertainty. And on top of that, we just are uncertain about how we're going to survive. Is the next deal going to close? Are the rates going to spike? Are there going to be tariffs? Right? So uncertainty is a wall that we are operating within if we're in a room. The next is family and life pressures I was in. Am I enough? Will I make my parents proud of me? Can I make my society proud of me? Can I cover all of my expenses? As a solopreneur, I have all of these pressures looming. I have 2 little kids. So kids are on top of me all the time, and we're trying to run around. So who can recognize what this looks like? I'm on the phone. It's not me, obviously. I'm running on the phone. I'm running around. I'm headed to a meeting, but my daughter calls, and I've got to handle something. I've got my laptop. I'm running to a closing. You have all been here. Balancing all the juggling of hats that we all wear. The third wall is silence. Now I say silence because we are all silencing our inner voice. I got really good at that. I got really good at not listening to my inner voice. And now you may call it God, your moral compass, energy, but you get really good at not listening to what your inner voice is saying because you want to achieve the outcomes you have set up forth for yourself. So when you silence your inner voice, that becomes a wall and in the context of what you're operating. But the other part of that is, as leaders, isn't it true that the loudest person in the room often is who gets listened to? And you don't want to say anything because you're afraid of how you're going to be seen. You're afraid of how somebody's going to perceive you. So even though you feel like it doesn't sit right with you, or you should question something, nobody else is saying anything. Right? Have you ever been in a room where you just don't say anything because nobody else is saying anything? And it could be like a boss, the team, family members, right? When we're surrounded by others who don't say anything, and if we don't feel like something's right, when we silence ourselves, or if you're the leader, you don't allow the space for disagreement, so it goes both ways, that silence becomes a wall under which you're operating. And then finally, of course, we all know this, technology and automation. Now in 2007, of course, we didn't have AI, but technology was there. So like I forwarded an email because there was email. I mean, I remember like in college, I didn't have email. And it's so much easier and faster to do things now with technology and automation. And that automation is causing us to do things faster, feel like we have to go faster because everybody else is doing it faster. And AI is an incredible tool. This slide was created by AI. Right? I use AI pretty much every day. We all do. It is such a great, I call it an intern, for the work that we do. But our human judgment matters. We can't just rely on what AI is telling us. Do you know that Deloitte just came out with a study 2 months ago? They surveyed 9,000 leaders across 89 countries. Guess what the survey results say? 60% of these leaders use AI to help them make decisions. But only 5% feel like they can rely on them or actually manage that. So I did a little experiment. Yesterday, I went to my AI, and I thought, okay, I'm about to speak to women in the affordable housing space. So this is a very basic example. Thank you, Mark, for helping me come up with this idea. But anyway, so I basically asked it, I need to close on a multifamily housing transaction today, but I just found out that the insurance certificate is incomplete. What should I do? Anybody have Any ideas of what AI told me? Well, this is my boyfriend, Claude, by the way. I am single, sadly. Who thinks that Claude gave me a one-line answer? No? Who thinks Claude asked me some questions? Haha. Well, let me tell you what Claude said. I mean, you guys are laughing. Isn't that crazy? Yeah, oh my God is right. Oh, some of you have been in these shoes before. Here's the question. What are the legal consequences? What is the information missing? Who is going to be affected? I mean, there are so many questions that we should be talking, but think about, you all are way smarter than this. But there are leaders, there are people in this world who are asking AI questions and are not and trusting it as if it's facts. They're not going back and asking, they're not applying human judgment. And when you don't apply your own common sense, your own intelligence and knowledge and brilliance to what AI is suggesting, you're creating a wall that you're going to drift within. And the thing is like you have intention, but the gap between intention and action begins to widen in all of these walls. And that gap is called the drift. And unless we're aware of it, we can't do anything about it. And I think this is a modern leadership challenge today, is how do we control the drift, right? Because the drift is these four walls that we're living in that we don't even realize it, but they are all there every single day, multiple times a day, every single one of us. Uncertainty, family and life pressures, silence, and technology and automation. And we are living in a self-imposed prison without realizing it. And it looks like glass walls. I literally had to go to prison to understand that I was living in a self-imposed prison my whole life without freedom. So what are we going to do about it? I began to think about, okay, in society, in business, we have guardrails for everything, don't we? We have guardrails for HR, for people, so we have HR. We have guardrails for technology, so we have cybersecurity and password protection. You have guardrails for your processes, compliance, right? And then you have guardrails for your outputs, audit, QR. But you know the place that we don't have guardrails? Our thoughts. So I decided, what if I built something that would actually be a simple process for our thoughts so that none of you will drift. None of you will go through what I went through. So I created the Clarity Loop. Now it's 4 questions, it's not a mindset shift, it is an actual process, it's 4 questions. And I'm going to walk you through it because it encompasses a decade of research that I've been doing around what the heck went wrong in my life. I began to research the psychology of decision making, cognitive biases, as well as behavioral science to understand in the moments of pressure and speed and noise and all of it, there are so many things swirling around in our head, and if we're not aware of it, we're not going to be able to do anything about it. So the first question is, what am I feeling right now? So I'd like for all of you to think about a decision that you either need to make or you just made and it's not sitting with you yet, and you haven't quite made the decision yet, okay? So think about the decision and think, what am I feeling right now? Because what happens is, in a moment of urgency, if we're not aware of our feelings, we begin to act and operate from emotional activation. And our emotions begin to dictate how we're going to make decisions. In my case, I was scared of not being able to provide for my family, fear of not making my parents proud of me, fear of not being good enough. But it didn't look like fear. I didn't define it as fear. It looked like success, ambition, efficiency. I didn't know to label it as a fear, as an emotion. But oftentimes fear or an emotion, jealousy, there's so many emotions that we have around something that we have to do. So what am I feeling right now? Then the second question is, what story am I believing? Because we create a story in our head. It's like a narrative. Sometimes it's imaginary, right? We create this binary. In my case, I have to get this client, otherwise I'm not going to be able to survive. And it's rarely either or. There's usually a whole spectrum of options in between, but we don't see it that way because we convince ourselves of the binary. We convince ourselves of the story we're telling ourselves, and so we don't have clarity. And this is exactly where we begin to rationalize the decisions we're making. There's these concepts called confirmation bias, outcome bias, self-serving bias. You believe the things, you tell yourself the story that you want to hear so that the thing that you want to create or what you want to happen, happens. You just convince yourself, you only take in those facts. It's also where you start to make assumptions and where you justify what you're doing. Because you're telling yourself a story, so it's easy to justify. In my case, I was like, well, every other big developer is kind of doing something similar, must be okay. And they're represented by the big firm, so they must have already done all the due diligence and research, so it must be okay. The third question, what matters most here? This is where we go from performance to alignment. Now, I was raised with incredible core values, but somewhere along the line, I wasn't listening to my core values. I wasn't paying attention to my core values. Actually, I have a question. How many of you know your 2 core values? Oh, wow. Okay, so I actually do this. I just did this last week in Minneapolis. I do a workshop all around figuring out your core values, which would be very powerful for many of you. But this is where you start to align with your core values and you start to apply the concepts of moral awareness and moral judgment. It's not that we don't know that these things exist, right? Conceptually, you all can recognize there should be this thing called moral awareness or moral judgment. But when you're operating at a pace and under pressure, because you have a job and you have kids to care for and you have a boss or you have a client and you got to close, like you're not thinking about what matters most. You're thinking about, I got to make money and I got to close the deal. But if you're not paying attention to what matters most, you're not applying any level of moral awareness or moral judgment to the decision you're about to make. And then finally, the fourth question is, what choice can I own later? This is the hardest. Because this is where you go and you start thinking about accountability. And a concept that I learned is moral humility. You all know humility. We teach our kids, be humble. But moral humility is this. I am capable of drift. And if I'm capable of drift, I need a process and I need to be aware so I don't drift. It's seeing yourself in 5 years and being able to own this decision you're about to make. In front of your board, in front of your team, in front of your family, on the front page of the newspaper. So it's the clarity loop. What am I feeling? What story am I telling myself? What matters most here? And what choice can I own later? Some of you are taking pictures. I promise you there's going to be a QR code in a second. You can scan it, and I'll send you a whole toolkit with all of these, plus some slides, with maybe a little feedback, so a little treat. Now, if some of you are out here thinking, this would never happen to me. Like, I'm smarter than her. I'm more educated than her. My parents raised me better than hers. I'm more immune. I'm more discerning. That is the most dangerous assumption in this room. Because when you begin to think you're separate or different from others, that is the trap. When I was in prison, I spent about 5 months in federal at a place called Pullman, which is an hour north of Orlando. And 5 months in, my attorney sent me an email and he said, hey, there's an attorney, a prosecutor in Tampa who is asking if you'll testify in this other case in Tampa. Different set of facts, same developer. They think you might know something and you can be a witness. Now, the catch was, there's no federal facility in Tampa. Now, you would think like it's only an hour and a half away. That's not how the system works. He said, if you agree to testify, there's a chance you might get out early, but you have to go sit in county jail. So I'm like, well, okay, I'm 5 months in. If I get to come out early, then I don't have to go to halfway house and I can skip, that plus a couple months. I'll take that deal. So now I'm being transported to county jail. They handcuff and shackle me with a waist chain again. They pile me onto an armored van. And as I'm driving to county, let me tell you what I'm thinking. I'll preface it by telling you that when you're in the federal system, if you get in trouble, if you get caught with contraband, if you get into a fight, like your punishment is you get sent to county. Yeah, so girls would come back and I would hear stories about county. How horrible the guards are, how horrible the food is, just like horrible in general. Now, I am voluntarily choosing to go to county. But I'm doing it because if I help, I might get out early, and that's a deal I want to take. So I'm sitting in an armored van, and I'm driving, handcuffed and shackled. I'm not driving, they're driving. I'm sitting, and they're driving me, handcuffed and shackled, and what's going on? Oh, when your kids call? I can silence it, but the kids still call. So I'm driving in an armored van, and what's going on in my head is, I don't belong with those women. I've spent 5 months in federal, and I'm driving to county, and I think to myself, I'm better than they are. I'm educated, I'm an attorney, I don't belong with them. And I got there, and the woman above me was in for prostitution and selling drugs. And the woman next to me was a homeless person who was also selling drugs. And the woman above her was also in for selling meth with a 4-year-old at home. And I never before would have met these women. And I absolutely would have passed judgment on them. And I spent 23 days cooking, eating, praying, crying, sleeping with them. And I realized, how dare I have the audacity to pass judgment on these women? Because but for the grace of God, they'll go I. We are all drops from the same ocean. We are all human beings, flawed, trying to figure this crazy thing called life out. And I don't let my bad decisions define me. It has refined me into a much better human than I used to be. So one night actually, we were sitting watching TV, my bunkies and I, my cubemates and I, and in the county jail that I was at, there were these cold, hard metal blue chairs, like stuck to the ground. So we would sit there and watch TV, and the TV was stuck to the wall, like in the corner, like at the DMV. So we're sitting there, we're watching TV, and the movie Burlesque comes on. Has anybody seen this movie, Burlesque? It's so fun, right? Christina Aguilera, Cher. I kind of want to look like Christina Aguilera in this movie. Like, it's such great fun. So we stand up and we're dancing and we're singing and we're finding joy in county jail. Imagine. So we go back to our cube and one of the women says, hey, do you know how to Bollywood dance? To which, of course, I was like, it's kind of a trick question, because all of us Indians think we know how to Bollywood dance. So she says, will you teach us? I was like, but we don't have any Indian music. She said, but I'll hum it. So I taught them, and I'd like to invite all of you to stand if you're able. And Ashley and Mark Shelburne, please get up here on stage with me. Come on, Mark. He was hesitating back there. He thought he could hide. But I see him, so he can't hide. Let's go! Give me a round for Mark! Here, Ashley, come on. Okay, so she starts humming this song, which you will all recognize. Come on, Mark, you got this. He's got the white man's overbite. I've known him for 30 plus years, but you can do this. I have faith. I have faith. All right, so she starts humming this song. You guys know this song, right? Okay, So I told them, put your hands up like a goalpost. Come on, football goalpost. All right. Bounce your shoulders up and down. Open and close the light bulb. Great, now put your hips into it. There you go. Mark, yeah. Come on, Mark, shake your hips. Come on, Mark.
This is as good as I can do.
Come on, Mark. There you go, you guys got it. Awesome. Look at this room. This is amazing. We got a bunch of good. All right, thank you.
Oh my God, good.
Good job. Give it up for them. Give it up for Mark and Ashley. That was amazing, Mark. So there I was sitting in county jail, Bollywood dancing with women who I was passing on judgment on 23 days before. And when we can actually remove that layer of judgment and recognize our humanity, there I was sitting in the hardest of places, and I found joy with my new sisters. So I'm going to take a couple questions, and please scan my QR code. I'd love some feedback, and I will send you a toolkit as a thank you, and link to buy my book, which I will be selling a few afterwards. But I do treasure any feedback I get, because I am trying to continue to improve what I do for all of you. But I'd love to take some questions. I think we have a little bit of time, and I'm going to close with a story after this. And no question off the table, so feel free to ask what you want. Yes?
What was the worst part of your experience in either of the jails?
So Ashley asked, what was the worst part of my experience in either of the actually it was in 3. I was in one in Miami for 10 days, then Coleman, and then the county jail. I mean, for sure the worst part was being away from my kids. You know, even though they would come and visit me, and I called them and I spoke to them, knowing that they had to go through life, like one specific thing I can tell you is, both my kids are incredible athletes. My daughter plays volleyball in college now, but at the time she was a soccer player, and I was soccer mom. You know, I would go to every practice and every game, and I was doing all those things. And during that time that we were in, that I was in prison, she ended up quitting soccer. And then she wasn't active at all, and she gained a ton of weight and got really depressed. And so that was, like those are consequences of the decisions I made that I could never have measured or known, right? But when we make decisions, it affects people even when we don't realize it's going to affect them. Yes?
Did you get out early?
So yes. I'm going to tell the story now in a second, but yes. I got out 2 weeks later, so that story's coming. Yes?
So you talked about noticing drift with yourself. What would you recommend folks do if they notice drift with someone else, whether it be a loved one or a colleague or a mentor? What do you wish someone would have said?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for those of you over here that couldn't hear, she said, I talked about noticing drift within myself. Well, how do you handle it when you can see that somebody else is experiencing drift or doing something is drifting? I am a really big believer, and if you ask people that know me, I wear my heart on my sleeve, I tell it like it is, and I am very vulnerable. So I would probably have a very frank, real conversation and be authentic about it. No matter how hard it is. One of the things that I've learned in my research is that loss aversion is a thing. We don't want to lose our friends, our clients, our loved ones. We don't want to lose them, because who wants to lose anything? But sometimes we have to risk losing to have the truth, because the consequences of you not making them aware could be way more severe, right? I wish, so like in my case, I was a solopreneur. I didn't have anybody checking me. I didn't have a boss to look, there was no checks and balances. I was making all the decisions. I was in a silo making decisions. And so there was nobody to check what I was doing. And I just kept everything I was doing kind of like within my vacuum of my mental state. But I think when we're around people that can say something, you have an obligation to say something to protect them down the road, hopefully. As hard as it is. I think Laura's telling me to wrap it up, yes? Okay, all right, so I'm going to close the story. I will be here after selling a few books. They're pre-launch, but if anybody has questions, feel free to come up after. So the question was, did I get out early? So 2 weeks, after 23 days, I went back to federal, and my attorney had said, okay, there will be a, sorry, that's like giving it away. My attorney had said there will be a hearing on a Friday morning where the judge will decide. If you get it's called a Rule 35, an early release. He said, call me at 10 because the hearing's at 9. Okay? So it's 10 o'clock. I walk up to a wall of payphones. I don't even know, you guys know what those are? Yeah, so I walk up to payphones. I pick up the payphone. I dial a bazillion numbers to get out. And David picks up the phone, and the first thing out of his mouth is, "You're going home!" And it felt like such elation. The next call I made was to my parents. And I told, so they knew, of course, that there was a hearing. So my mom answers the phone, and I said, "Mom, Dad can leave. I'm coming home." And you know what she said? "Dad left an hour ago." Like, that's the kind of faith my parents have. So 5 hours later, I walk in, I run into my dad's arms, right? Of course, I had asked my mom, please, I guess I had told her the night before, to please send clothes so I can change. I didn't want to be in prison clothes when I got home. But I had said to my mom, don't tell the kids. I want to surprise them. So 5 hours later, I arrive at home, and I walked into the house, and this is the actual video of me surprising my children. And my nephew was there, yeah. This is when people cry, it's okay. It's my nephew. You know, this was when I realized, right, that I get a whole new chance at life. And I had spent my whole life believing that I had to achieve and be this person and live under pressure and speed, and isn't it all for them, right? So sometimes people ask me, and I want to share a little story about my dad. When he was 12, he had just finished reading Gandhi's autobiography. And in Gandhi's autobiography, Gandhi shares this really embarrassing, humiliating moment. And my dad one day says to his dad, "I don't understand." Now, on the day that my dad says this, he had just come home from school, and my grandfather says, "Let's go for a bike ride." So my grandfather was very sick by this time. He sits on the carriage. My dad's wheeling around on these dirt roads. There's no paved roads in this small little town that my dad comes from called Beatty. They arrive at this pond, and Dad gets off the bike, and Dad says, "I don't understand. Why would Gandhi share this really embarrassing, humiliating moment in his autobiography that is now documented for the entire world to read about forever?" And my grandfather says, "Because that's the point, son. When you go through life's hard experiences and you learn hard lessons, you have an obligation to share it so that others will never go through what you went through." I believe I'm my grandfather's legacy. I actually think he's always here with me. I never got to meet him. I could have never known I'd be standing in front of you 10 years ago, getting to share this and hopefully inspiring at least one of you today to make better decisions and to rise through anything. But what's my legacy going to be? Yeah, they grew up into great, tall, beautiful kids. Well, I hope that when my kids are fighting the fight, they think of their great-grandfather, my Dadaji. And when they move to a new city and are scared and do it anyway, I hope they think of my parents, their Nana and Nani. And when they go through struggle and are under pressure and speed, I hope they remember they can rise into clarity and make better decisions and lean on each other, like every one of you will lean on each other here at One. That's a legacy I can live with. So sometimes people ask me, what would you do if you had had a clarity loop? I actually don't want to think about it, but this is what I know. You now have it. You now have a process of 4 simple questions that you can ask yourself in every single moment, because we make 36,000 decisions a day. at home, at work, in our lives. And it just takes 30 seconds. Because our legacy doesn't start when we're 80. My legacy is helping people rise to clarity. People don't remember us by how much money we made, what car we drove, how many deals we closed. They remember us by the stories we created, by the decisions that we made and what we did about it, how we grew through it. So the question is, what will your legacy be? What decisions will you make to rise to clarity today? Thank you so much. I'm watching. Thank you.